a lot of people now will try and get in as early as possible, maybe something pendimethalin or flufenicet base, and then maybe follow up in the spring with maybe something like Broadway Star. But, I think it's kind of, again, trying to figure out what weeds that you're targeting, and then, kind of fix your herbicide program then to deal with that issue. And that might involve going early, or it might involve delaying a little bit into the spring,
With many crops already in the ground and more being planted this week, attention will shift to weed control in these crops. Weed problems which arose in previous years should be recognised and built into herbicide programs. However, as time ticks by, the window for pre-emerge herbicide is very narrow. Have you decided on the best approach for weed control on your crops this year? You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. There's a huge array of herbicides available to be applied to winter cereals, and also considering that every field may have a different weed profile, deciding on the correct product and approach can be difficult. To discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by Shay Phelan and Ciaran, both Tillage Specialists in Teagasc, to discuss the options available to growers this year. Shay, I just want to come to you first, and just to make sure everyone's on the same page. What are the differences between a pre-emerge, a peri-emerge, and a post-emerge herbicide application?
Yeah, so Michael, when we're thinking about growth stages and applying herbicides to crops, you're right, there are three kind of key stages, if you like, in terms of do's and don'ts. I suppose to start off with, a pre-emergence herbicide is a herbicide that you apply almost directly behind the drill before the crop or any of the weeds get above the ground. So that's kind of your classic pre-emergence sort of timing. Your peri-emergence, which is the one that kind of catches people out a little bit from the point of view of maybe damage sometimes by herbicides, is just when the crop is just about to come above the ground. So you have your cotyledon, or you have your coleoptile, should I say, just about breaking ground, and within a couple of days you're going to see lines of crop up and down the field. That's kind of your peri-emergence state. Then obviously post-emergence then is when the crop is fully emerged. You can see your lines up and down the field. So they're the kind of three, I suppose, if you like, key stages in terms of applying your herbicide.
Okay, and then you have, I suppose, to a degree, you have early post-emerge and late post-emerge as well, maybe in that as well, do you?
Of course, yes, you do. So you have that kind of typical, early post-emerge where you're trying to get on maybe 2-3 leaf stage or something like that, and maybe put in an insecticide with it as well. And then you have your late post-emerge, which is some cases maybe post-Christmas or early New Year, where you're trying to wrap up weeds and stuff like that as well, and trying to get some of those grass weeds, maybe the likes of bromes and stuff like that, later on with some of that really heavy chemistry, or better, heavy chemistry in the new year.
So Shay, there's lots of crops in the ground, and they were sown, a few days ago. But in terms of this pre-emerge timing, is it as soon as you said before, as the rollers kind of get out of the field, and you want to try and get in there within this 48-hour period? But crops aren't really up until at least 7 days, probably 10 days, or maybe 14 days. Is that pre-emerge timing a bit wider than this 48 hours, or where would it be?
Yeah, as you say, Mike, most of the labels will say, you should be in within 48 hours. I suppose there is a little bit of flexibility, especially the later you go in the season and the crop takes longer to come up. But I still think that most people should try to aim to get in within that 48 hours window, or maybe even 72 hours. Because I think, if you're applying herbicide there and you get significant rain afterwards or something like that, and you have small roots taking up the herbicide, it can do a little bit of damage. So you kind of try to get on there as soon as you possibly can after the crop is sown to be ideal,
Yeah, so Shay, just in terms of those timings, that little bit of flexibility, is it as flexible for winter barley as it would be for winter wheat?
Good question, Michael, again. And I suppose, winter wheat being that little bit more robust towards herbicides, you probably can stretch that window a little bit longer. But certainly winter barley, which tends to be a little bit softer and tends to be a little bit more susceptible to some of the herbicides, you try and stick as close to that 48-hour window as you possibly can. Wheat, you do have that couple of days more, I suppose, flexibility to get out on that. But that said, I would always still try to keep it on or get it on as early as I possibly can.
Okay. Ciaran, just to bring you in here, a lot of farmers might be listening to this and kind of thinking, yeah, pre-emerge sounds great and all that, but Look, it's so much easier to get out and spray a crop when I can actually see the tram lines going up and down, because other than that, if I'm going pre-emerge, I either need a GPS or I need bout markers or something on the ground so I can see where I'm going. Given all of that, is it still worth the farmer's point of view, or best practice or better weed control, I suppose, maybe all out, to really have a go and try and get that pre-emerge application on?
The very short answer, Michael, pre-em works better,
Right.
in most cases. So I suppose really that's why we promote it, I suppose, really, or encourage people to do it. Now, I do think it is dependent on your weed spectrum as always, and that would be more particularly related to grass weeds. And also, I suppose, in terms of winter barley, where sterile brome may be an issue on the farm, you're never going to get 100% control of sterile brome in winter barley, but you increase your chances by doing a pre-emergence application. I think that's really the key. And if you look at the label of, say, any of the flufenicide products, just to use an example, they will say annual meadowgrass is susceptible pre-emergence and maybe up to the 2-leaf stage post-em, but after that you're losing ground. So that's why I suppose, particularly in a grass weed scenario, that we would encourage people to go pre-em really.
When you talk about that grass weed control, is there a chance to get, if you like, a second bite of the cherry to try and control some of those grass weeds after that pre-emerge application?
There is in wheat, notwithstanding some of the resistance issues, which we can chat about in a second. But in wheat, the likes of your pendimethalin-based products, flufenicet, good on annual meadowgrass will certainly help in brome control. But you do a follow up. You have the sulfonylureas that you can follow up with in spring, and that's a programmed approach that you can take. I suppose in winter barley, there isn't really a second bite of the cherry. It's early or not at all really for the likes of annual meadowgrass and sterile brome. And look, annual meadowgrass is becoming a bigger issue. I suppose we certainly did see a lot of it last year, probably related to the wet season and more open crops. But you certainly, I think, for the season, going forward, we would need to keep our eye on the ball in relation to annual meadowgrass, because quite quickly it could get out of control on you.
So Shay, just talking about winter barley and sticking there, what are the most commonly used pre-emerge herbicides that guys are most likely to be able to find in their local merchant's yard, if you like?
They're probably going to be based around the likes of flufenicid, pendimethalin, a bit of diflufenic and things like that. So you're looking at typically, like your Firebird type products, your Firebird or your Firebird Met, which guys generally tend to use in that pre-em sort of scenario. You have the likes of Flight, which contains pendimethalin and picolinophin. And then you have sort of mixes like the Phi, which would be post-sulfocarb with a bit of diflufenic. And in some cases, and some merchants, they have a good bit of tower around it as well, which is another active ingredient there, which is close tolerant in that, along with the DFF and the pendimethalin. So they're kind of, I suppose, the 4 or 5 sort of main mixes or products that people use. And as I say, most of them are a mix of active ingredients, and I think that's important as well.
So in terms of rates, Shay, for some of the products you mentioned there, and I suppose maybe bearing in mind the weed threat that Ciaran talks about in terms of annual meadowgrass, what sort of rates would you recommend people using for that bit of persistency?
Yeah, so again, if we start off with something like some of the Firebirds on winter barley, Firebird or Griffin or some of those, you're looking at a full rate on barley is 0.3 of a litre per hectare. On some of the other flufenicets, it can be up to 0.6, but I suppose label rate is what you kind of have to look at for each of the different products. So that would be kind of your flufenicets. In terms of Flight, you're looking at probably about 4 litres a hectare, something like that. The Defy and DFF, you're probably that mix, which is quite popular. You're looking at probably about 2 litres of Defy and 0.1 of DFF, and that's quite a good mix as well. In terms of something like Tower, generally speaking, you're looking at somewhere around 2 litres of Tower. And if I take just the Firebird Met, which is probably the other option that's out there, the user rate for winter barley is about 0.5 of a litre per hectare, even though the full rate is a litre per hectare. The 0.5 is a kind of a user rate for barley. It's a little bit easier on the barley. Like I mentioned earlier on, barley is not as robust for some of these herbicides. A litre can be used on wheat, but generally use 0.5 of a litre of Firebird Met on winter barley.
Ciaran, are there similar suite of products available for winter wheat, or is there anything else that's maybe a bit more robust?
Yeah, I suppose, like I kind of said earlier, you kind of have a lot of the same pre-em options or certainly early post-emergence based on flufenicet, DFF, obviously your prosulfocarbon pendimethalins. And I suppose the key one there that I should have said a while ago in terms of rate is, keep those rates up. There's very little flexibility for using low rates. I mean, resistance is a live issue. So, keep those rates up, use them as early as possible. Then, obviously, as you said, in wheat, there are some what people might call backdoor options or something like that. Like you have the likes of Pacifica, your monoliths, your Broadway Star. Those type products do, give you, I suppose, a later application window, and you can use them in the spring, which can be very useful. But I think, in any field, it's a kind of a programmed approach. I suppose a lot of people now will try and get in as early as possible, maybe something pendimethalin or flufenicet base, and then maybe follow up in the spring with maybe something like Broadway Star. But I think it's kind of again trying to figure out what weeds that you're targeting, and then kind of make your herbicide, fix your herbicide program then to deal with that issue, and that might involve going early, or it might involve delaying a little bit into the spring.
Okay, and as you mentioned, kind of the higher rates, or try and go with the label rates as close as you can, at least, anyways. Is there any issue then, Ciaran, in terms of overlaps on the ins and outs and the headlands of some of these products?
There can be at times, I suppose, Finicet is the obvious one. I know Shay said it there already, but we'll say Firebird would have a 0.3 per litre per hectare of rate in winter barley, but some of the generic ones like, Reliance and Aceto, you can go up to 0.6, but we have seen, some crop effects from the higher rates. So I think you're going to get that obviously then, Michael, as you say, with overlap. So I think I'd be cautious there. I would kind of use I'd be cautious with the likes of flufenicet, really, avoid overlaps, use as Shay said there, the recommended rate, that sort of 0.3 equivalent of the old fashioned Firebird, or 0.5 of Firebird Met, now these overlaps, they do recover, but it certainly sets the crop back for a period of time.
Sure. And Shay, Ciaran just mentioned the Firebird Met a second ago, and I think you mentioned in that it's a lower rate of Firebird Met in barley than it is in wheat. I think it's half the rate, you might have said, half litre versus a litre. Does that, if a farmer's going to use his Firebird Met, does that need to be topped up in terms of maybe meadowgrass along the way, or is that sufficient in winter barley?
In winter barley, it depends on the how much meadowgrass you're trying to control, and the size of the problem. But in general, for small sort of infestation, it's generally good enough. But you can come back and top it up if you need to, Michael. I mean, you can go back in after 4 or 5 weeks if you want to, and top it up again. But generally speaking, in winter barley in good conditions, it should nearly be good enough at that stage. You can actually go up all the way up to growth stage 12 or 13 in terms of if you want a post-emergence application of it as well. So you do have a time there. In wheat, you'd have a little bit longer. But generally speaking, that 0.5 rate, I find, is generally good enough on winter barley if it's timed right.
Ciaran, the last question to you, and I'm just thinking about, and hopefully we'll have a really nice back end, better than the previous 2 years, I hope. And in that scenario, all farmers will get those pre-emerge herbicides on, as we're talking about. But in a scenario where a farmer, for workload or for whatever reason, misses out on the pre-emerge, what's the next best in terms of a post-emerge scenario for grass weed control?
Yeah, I think, look, we have to be realistic as well. Growers will be to the pin of their collar to get crops sown, and no one is going to hop down off a drill and hop into a sprayer if there's a fine day. So, not everyone is going to get a pre-em done. You certainly would target it. Your next best option is early post-emergence. Once that crop is up, you certainly will get very good control, with your pendimethalin, with your flufenicets, of the likes of annual meadowgrass at that kind of early post-emergence timing. It may fall in even with insecticide at that 3 to 4 leaf stage, and that often works, to be fair. I think the other thing to consider as well is there nearly always will be a tidy up, especially in the likes of winter barley, fumetry, groundsel, maybe speedwell, some weeds that can slip through in the autumn. And that's something that you can plan for with a sulfonylurea. But there is no, as we said earlier on, kind of backdoor in barley for your grass weeds. So that has to be the target. If you're wheat and barley on the farm, you kind of have to get that barley grass weed scenario covered in the autumn, really. In wheat, look, as I said, the target still is to do it in the autumn, but you have the flexibility of the sulfonylureas. But we have to say we are finding more resistance to annual meadowgrass, particularly with the sulfonylureas. So you can't depend on it. So you kind of wouldn't let the opportunity go in the autumn if you can do it. But look, if it has to go to the spring, that's the way it is. But the control may not be as good,
Ciaran, thanks very much as always, and Shay as well. Thanks very much. There's a huge amount in that. A lot of stuff to be unpacked, I think, by lots of growers. Lots of good practice, I think, going on out there at the moment. But as you keep, I suppose, talking about through all of this, grass weeds are a huge issue on lots of farms, and pre-emerge is the only way for doing it. But guys, listen, thanks very much again, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it this week, and my thanks to Shay and Ciaran for joining me on the show. Just remember that the Teagasc Crop Report app is available to download from the Apple or Android stores. In the app, we list the herbicides mentioned and the weed susceptibility charts, which are an excellent reference when making a decision about which herbicide to use in your farm. A link to these apps is in the show notes. So that's it for this week, and if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.